Hello and welcome back to Livestream Rebels with me, Dan, and also Mark. So today we're going to be discussing a little bit about Facebook Groups APIs. You can probably tell by the title. We're going to be discussing some changes about that, answering a few questions, and keeping you informed with all the latest updates on that. So, Mark, how's your week been?
Yeah, not been too bad actually. Fairly busy-ish, I suppose, really. A few jobs to catch up on, the usual edits to do for clients for this week that I do on a rolling basis. So just making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And then covering later this week, because you're disappearing off. How dare you?
I know. Yeah, I'm off to Edinburgh for a few days to have some time off. So I will be leaving everything for Mark to deal with, which will be lovely. So we have a funeral later on in the week that Mark is doing. That should be a nice job. That we've covered a lot about funeral streaming before on this channel and discussed how we do it. More from a complex point of view of the other types of funerals we do, where it's like burials and stuff. But it might be worth one day going over how we do it in a standard church, really.
I think more from the technical perspective and how we actually get the stream out and how we connect the stream to the streaming platform. Because obviously this is the kind of stream that isn't going to be a public stream. It's going to be a private stream. So, and there are some possible changes afoot in how we do that as well. So it probably is definitely a topic that we need to cover in a future episode, in how we are changing things and making it a little bit more, I was going to say secure, but secure is not really the issue. It's just more private. We have a bit more control over it, basically. So, which is ultimately what you want with those kind of things. So yeah, I'm off doing a funeral stream tomorrow. So yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to getting to grips with it, but not necessarily looking forward to the occasion. But it's a service that I think has been very much needed, certainly since the pandemic. And I know that some people have some moral issues with it, but ultimately the way you've got to think of it is that you are providing a very valuable service for people who can't actually attend. So if you've got family who, say, for instance, have mobility problems and can't get there, or if you've got family who are miles away, on a different continent, even different country, and they still want to be part of the actual service, then they still can be. And I think that's kind of the mindset that we've had to adopt to be able to actually come to terms with providing that service. So I think, we've got that pretty much nailed now. So very valuable service. And the funeral directors that we work with are just an absolute pleasure to interact with, so professional, and just make life easy for everybody involved, basically. So yeah, all good.
Absolutely. And today we're talking about something else that's got a lot of change in it. Facebook groups. Now this conversation came about because it was a week or so back, I said to you, oh, we should go live at a Facebook group. And you turned around and said...
that we can, but it's going to be a bit more challenging in the future. I can't even remember what the context of that conversation was about.
Yeah, I can't either.
I mean, to be honest, it is something that we have covered briefly in the past, but not necessarily as in-depth as it's going to be on this particular show, because Meta, in their wisdom, have decided to remove the API, which basically is the access that they originally gave out to third-party tools to enable you to schedule posts and interact with your audience within a group, and also to live stream to a group. And ultimately, that's the tactic that we are talking about today is how you can live stream into a Facebook group. So the ability to do it isn't going away completely, but the ability to use third-party software in a particular way is being removed, because that API access is what a lot of the third-party tools rely on for that connection into the actual platform and what you can actually do with it. So what we're going to talk about today is using a slightly different protocol called RTMP, which I tested Daniel on just before we went live, and he failed miserably because he couldn't remember what the acronym stood for. So here's your chance to redeem yourself. RTMP.
It's not real-time mass penguins. I knew the first part of it, but I didn't know the last bit. But it's actually real-time messaging protocol. Has nothing to do with penguins.
Indeed, which is such a shame, because I do like penguins.
They are cute.
Especially the chocolate-covered ones. But that's a story for a different time.
Oh, that was about as bad as the jokes on the penguins.
Indeed. So yes, RTMP is a protocol that you can still use within Facebook groups to connect to a third-party tool to enable you to go live. Now, as far as I'm aware, you should still be able to go live natively into a group if you're using the Facebook Creator app, Live Creator, I think it's called. So if you were to connect a webcam, you should be able to go direct into the actual Facebook group. Where you're going to get tripped up a little bit with using a third-party tool or software. So, for instance, a browser-based one like Streamyard or EVMUX or OneStream or any of these browser-based ones, Be Live, etc. They have predominantly relied on the API, but they do have the function to do an RTMP stream, and I think they usually allow one RTMP stream, so you could still go live in your Facebook group. Now, what will be a challenge is then being able to see the comments that are coming back through, because that has been a challenge in the past, where you've had to give access to the app or the third-party tool that you've been using to see the comments. So you've had to kind of engage with your audience and kind of prompt them into clicking access credentials to allow that tool to see the comment. That is something that you're probably not going to be able to do in the future when the API access is removed completely, because RTMP isn't a two-way communication, it's only one way. So it'll only stream into the platform. You can't get any information out of it, which is ultimately what API was brought about to do, is that two-way communication. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. So today what we're going to do is I'm going to go into Facebook, and I'm going to show you where you would get the information that you need to be able to do an RTMP stream if you are using a third-party tool. And funnily enough, we actually had a question from somebody that we were working with at the back end of last week, who said, how do you go live in LinkedIn? And it's a very similar scenario. However, LinkedIn, of course, don't make it quite as easy. So yes. Ultimately, when we first started streaming to LinkedIn, we had to do a stream on my personal profile and also one on Dan's personal profiles, just to give us that little bit of extra exposure. But it meant that we had to get 2 lots of RTMP credentials, but it's where to find them that was always the issue within LinkedIn. But again, that could be something that we cover in a future show. Today's topic, as I say, is that scenario within Facebook. Any questions that kind of spring to mind, first of all, Dan, before we jump in and kind of do the demo on how to find these particular credentials?
Yeah, so from when they stopped this RTMP being able to stream, and you can only stream natively, will you still be able to do that from desktop?
They're not stopping RTMP, they're stopping the API.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
That's it, sorry, yes. So you'll still be able to stream from a desktop and from your phone using their app or using RTMP?
As far as I'm aware, yes. It'll just be, you'll have to do it direct through a webcam on the, I think it's called Live Creator or Creator Live. I can never remember. They keep changing the terminology, but
And
yeah, you'll still be
is
able to do that.
is the reason why they're doing this because it's such a to have that API for groups there for people to post through social media sites like Buffer and other ones that I can't remember the name of right now.
Hootsuite, all those kind of,
Hootsuite.
yeah.
I mean, that's a massive thing. And I know one of our clients uses it daily for about 50 of their clients.
Yeah.
And just to have that feature just gone is going to be massive.
So they announced that the API was going to be removed on the 23rd of January of 2024 and said that they were basically giving people 90 days notice that this was what they were planning to do. What they haven't said currently, and as we get closer to the day, they might divulge more details, but they haven't said why they're doing it or whether they're going to replace it with something else. Now, it could be because groups are the one thing that you can have more privacy with. So you can have a closed group, you can have a private group. So only people who you tell about the group can access it, and then obviously give them access into the group. A closed group can be found but not accessed. And then you have an open group that means that anybody can join. So there's privacy questions potentially around access to groups and what you can see and what you can't see. And for a long time, there's been talk of them also introducing ads within the group, which is something that they haven't done in the past. Is it a precursor to that? I can't see why it would be necessarily.
So that's what I was wondering, because we've seen Twitter, now X, formerly Twitter, everyone calls it. We've seen that go. They started charging for API, and they started locking down a lot on that. Reddit started charging for API and ridiculous amounts of money as well, and a load of apps had to close because of that. And then obviously there's no advertising in Facebook groups, so other than what you post in the group. So then there'll be no revenue for them to subsidize the API calls there. And if they're getting a lot of them, are they just closing them down because of cash?
Yeah, we can speculate till the cows come home, basically, and probably still not come up with the right answer. But until they decide to acknowledge and divulge the reasons behind it, we'll just kind of have to roll with the punches. And ultimately, a lot of people do use groups in a big way, have big communities on there. And it would be a shame for them to have their access completely removed, or find that, things are becoming more of a challenge to actually get engagement, etc., which it can be a challenge anyway. But if you've got a healthy, thriving group, then ultimately you want to continue to be able to do that. And there's loads of people I know who go live into groups. Is it going to push people towards other platforms? Potentially. Could be an issue for them in that respect, But again, it's finding something that has that excuse me, has that community feel, and has the ease of access. And I think that's always been the big thing, is the ease of access, and the ability to build those groups quite effectively and easily. But there has been, from what I've heard, from people I've spoken to, from what I've read as well, that there has been kind of diminishing returns on Facebook groups, and that is because they weren't, of some of the changes basically that Meta have made. So the one thing that you can always be certain of is that there will be change. There's always going to be change, and you need to make sure that you don't have all your eggs in one basket. I think is probably one of the best pieces of advice that we can ever give anybody, to make sure that they aren't solely reliant on a Facebook group or any social media platform. Never be solely reliable on it for your business, for your income generation, basically, because you're at the mercy of the people who make decisions based on what they ultimately want, and it could be their shareholders. Excuse me. So yeah, I would always say never rely on that kind of thing. Always try and, have something that you own yourself. So a website, an email list is probably one of the best options there as well, So just making sure that you've got as much control over stuff as you possibly can. And as I say, not giving somebody else literally the opportunity to pull the rug out from under your feet. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. So right, I think it's about time we kind of jumped into Facebook and first of all show you where you get the credentials, because you need two pieces of information basically to feed into the third-party tool that you want to use to stream. Now, a lot of people will already be familiar with RTMP, but some people won't be. So ultimately, that's why we thought it would be a good idea to kind of showcase what you can actually do. Now, I probably won't actually go live in the Facebook group that I'm connecting to, just because I've got so many bits of software running. I might try it, but in the past, it's kind of knocked the plug out my computer and it's died. And that's the last thing I want midway through a stream. So this is just basically a test group that I quite often use for getting into grips with these changes and doing some testing of quite often live streaming. So if you actually want to start a live stream, what you would need to do, and I will zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see this a bit better. You would ultimately kind of go down to, that's typical. Somebody decides to message me and I can't get back out of it. There we go. So what you would do is, if you wanted to create a post of any description, you've got what appears to only be three options here. So if I wanted to write something, I've got anonymous post, photo or video, or poll. Now I can click photo or video, or ultimately I can just click in the write something option. Then it'll bring up this create post dialog box. And then what I would then need to do is click on the ellipsis or the three dots to the right-hand side here, because you've only got four options here. You've got photo and video, tag people, check in, and your feeling or activity emoji. But if you click the more button, the ellipsis button, you will then see that you have a lot more option available to you. And ultimately, we want to go for the live video. So when we click on the live video option, it then takes us into the live video creator side of the back end of Facebook. And you've got two options here. You can create an event, which obviously is something that you would do in advance of actually going live. And you can invite people to that event. So that's quite a good option if you are doing something in advance and you kind of want to be able to make sure that you've got an audience joining you, so they have the option to say whether they're actually going to be attending the event. Or you can literally just go live straight away. So we are going to use the go live straight away option to showcase where you would find the credentials. Now, the credentials, as far as I'm aware, would be exactly the same if you're creating the event. I know that in the past, there was a slight change in the way that Facebook did live events, in that when you originally set up a live event, there was one link, and that link became live when obviously it hit the actual live scheduled time. But then there was a change to that, and then they were actually pushing you to a second link. Now, again, this could all change because of the API stuff, so we're not 100% certain on exactly what's going to happen moving forward with this, so we'll just keep an eye on it and we'll report back as and when we see any changes to that. But for today's demonstration, as I say, we're just going to use the Go Live option. So I'm going to click on the Go Live button here, and then once it loads up, we will have a series of options to actually go through and check. So the first one to look at is, I mentioned before that you can stream directly and was one of the questions that you were asking about before, Dan. You can stream direct from a webcam into Facebook. You don't have as much control, obviously, because ultimately people would say, well, you're talking about using third-party software. Why would you use third-party software as opposed to just a camera? It's because you've got control to do more stuff like we do here. So if I want to cut back to just Dan and I, a shot of just two of us on our cameras, I can do that, but you couldn't do that with just a webcam. So it just gives a bit more flexibility to make a bit more of an engaging presentation into your live stream, etc. that you're doing. So we need to select the streaming software option, which is actually the default option on my account. Whether that's on everybody's account, I'm not sure. Then underneath that, you'll see, if I zoom in a little bit, you'll see that we've actually got something called a stream key, and it says streaming software setup. So you need to copy and paste this stream key into the third-party software that you would be using. Now, you don't just need this. So what you need to do as well is just click the advanced settings dialog or option there. And then you'll see that there's a server URL. So you need to put into the software that you are using to go live the server URL, which connects. You'll see it still says API there, but ultimately that's not going to say that in the future. It'll probably just say RTMP. Now, currently, you have the option to toggle on something called persistent stream key. And a persistent stream key just means that it would be the same every time you go live. You use the same credentials. But that then obviously means that it wouldn't save the actual live broadcast necessarily, because as soon as you go live again, it would overwrite it. So it would probably just be a blank event on your Facebook group. But there is an option to do that. So if you were consistently going live, say for instance you did a Q&A session once a week, you could use a persistent stream key, and then you wouldn't have to be copying across these details every single time. And YouTube does something very, very similar, where you can use the same credentials for going live on a regular basis. So it's a handy little feature there if you are going to be going live on a consistent basis. So what I would do is I would just literally copy across the server URL into my streaming software, and then I would copy the stream key, and the stream key is unique to every stream unless you use the persistent one. So you'll get different credentials every single time there with the stream key. Now the stream URL will probably stay the same, but the stream key would ultimately change every single time you use it. Now there are some other things that you need to be aware of. Facebook will always prompt you to give your live title, and it will give you a warning dialog box if you don't put anything in there. It says optional, but it will prompt you, so don't panic. You can just override it and say, I don't want to put a title in. But it is, ultimately handy to have a title in there so that people know what your Facebook Live is going to be out. And especially if you are not using a persistent stream key, and it will be available for a replay. So you want people to be able to see that, and you want them to be incentivized to watch it. So giving them a good title gives them an idea of actually what the content of the live was about. Obviously, you can add a description as well, and you can potentially tag people in there as well. You can put check-ins, etc. So it's very much similar to what you can do with a normal post. It says raise money, not something I've ever used myself, so I can't really comment on that particular side of things. So that's ultimately most of the details that you would need to put in, and the credentials that you would have to pull across. So the next thing we have, if we scroll down a bit on the left-hand side of the menus here, we have our dashboard and we have our settings. So in settings, we have some stream settings that we can actually amend here. Now, this is something fairly new from the last time I looked at Facebook Live. You couldn't adjust the latency, which is basically the delay between you going live and what your audience sees. YouTube have had this for a long time, but you can select different options here. So if you stick it on auto, then it's probably just going to handle it and you haven't got anything to worry about. Normal and low latency. Obviously, it gives you a little bit of a description as to what the difference is between them all. And then if you go for the ultra low latency, that is the smallest amount of delay between what is actually live and what your audience see. So for us in the studio, as opposed to what the audience sees. Now, if you put it on low latency, you need to make sure that you've got a decent broadband connection or internet connection, because if you don't have a decent amount of upload speed, which is the critical factor for any live video, if you haven't got a decent upload speed and you go into low latency, then you could potentially end up with a lot of buffering for your audience when they're trying to view the actual Facebook Live. So I would suggest that you either go auto or normal, unless you've got a really good broadband connection or internet connection, and then you could do some testing with low or ultra low latency just to kind of see how that looks. The other option you have as well, and again, this probably would only be available, as I say, to a public facing live. So that's why this particular feature is disabled. So it probably won't work in a group because of the privacy reasons. So it'd be grayed out. But if you were to go live on a Facebook page, which ultimately is a public facing page, you would have the option to then embed that onto a website if you wanted to. And then you can also unpublish after the live event ends if you don't want the replay to be available. And some people don't. They wanted to literally make sure that their audience is there for the live, and it's a good incentive if you say there is no replay. Because in the past, people have always said, well, if I go live on Facebook, how do I stop that from happening? Well, there you go. It is actually in the settings, something that didn't used to be there. So they have added some quite good features in recently that give you a bit more control over actually what happens with it. It will be interesting to see whether all of these features are still available when the API is removed. So that is something that we're going to have to kind of keep an eye on. And as I say, we'll report back to see if that is the case.
I was just going to ask there as well, with that embed feature, is there, so you know how you can have public groups and private groups and closed groups and many other types of groups in Facebook. To have that embedded on a website, so I'm thinking of how their messenger chat works on websites. So they have a chat bot, Facebook, and as long as you're logged in on your browser and the cookies are stored on your browser, it will translate to any website and keep you logged in so you can interact as yourself. So I'm guessing it would be the same for an embed of a stream.
I don't think so, no. Not from a group. And as I say, that's why this particular feature is grayed out, because they won't allow you to do that from a Facebook group. So that there are always different rules around what you can and can't do within a Facebook group, as opposed to a Facebook page or a personal profile. And that is because a personal profile and a Facebook page are public facing, whereas a group isn't.
Do you think,
if it's an open group, it would be interesting to see if it's an open group whether that feature's in there. But again, I would have to test that out, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see where you come from, but I suspect it probably still wouldn't.
Yes.
Just because of the way that groups are separate from everything else that's public facing. But again, something we can check out and see. So what else do we have option wise? So with your viewers, you can allow them to rewind. So what I've done is within the settings tab, I've just selected viewer. So we can either allow, if we turn that off, they will have to watch it. If they are watching it live, they would have to watch it live. kind of does what it says on the tin. But if you enable this option, they could start to watch the live broadcast, and then they could actually pause it and rewind it when that particular feature is enabled. You can do auto-generated captions. Now, I've seen people do this before, and I've got to be honest with you, they can turn it off at viewer level, but I don't particularly advocate using Facebook's live captions. They are definitely getting better, but they are not good, and I've seen it replace some rather, I was going to say strange words, not replace strange words, but ultimately inject some less than, I can't even think of the word I want to use, but yeah, I've seen swear
Favorable
words.
terms?
yeah, all sorts of stuff come up that is just totally distracting, I think, more than anything, to be perfectly honest with you. So I'm not a big fan of it, but ultimately some people might be. And if you are looking at sort of accessibility, then that could be something that you could use. Test it again. One of the 3 rules of live streaming: test. So definitely. And then obviously you have this little third option here: allow viewers to message you directly through Messenger from your live. Now, you could actually incentivize people to send you a DM for some reason, if that's what you wanted to do. There's use cases for that. Not something I would necessarily want to use. And then you do have some interactivity within Facebook groups or Facebook Lives. Now, I've tested these and I've never found them particularly effective. So I've never managed to get the polls and the questions to come up when they're supposed to. Again, it might have changed, but it's not something that I've actually taken the time to experiment with and kind of see if they've improved enough to be able to make them usable. I have seen people use them with success, but I've also seen people be tripped up by them, and I've certainly been tripped up by them whenever I've tested them. So it's not something that I would want to advocate at this particular juncture. And the same with questions. I think questions might be a little bit easier, but again, if you're thinking about doing this, you've got to remember that you're trying to drive all of this as a single operator, unless you've got some help. And I know that I think you can give somebody admin access to your group who could go in and maybe control some of this at the same time as you. So you could do it between you. Again, something I would probably have to experiment with just to kind of see how it looks and how it feels. But it isn't something that I would necessarily do, because I would just do it using my third-party software rather than the integrated stuff within Facebook, etc. So I think that's pretty much it, to be honest with you, for what you need to do. So hopefully we've covered it in enough depth for everybody to get an understanding of where to look for the information that you need. Now, where do you put that information will very much depend on the platform or the tool that you're actually using. So if you're using a browser-based one, you just go and select RTMP as opposed to a streaming platform like Facebook or YouTube or X or LinkedIn. Choose the RTMP option. Collect those details from Facebook's backend, which means that you've ultimately got to have 2 pages open as well to be able to do that. So if you've got dual monitors or you've got the option to split your screen, that's probably the easiest way to do it. If you are using something like OBS, again, a very similar option, but that's not a browser-based third-party solution. That is an app-based solution. So it's a web app, and that is very effective, gives you a lot more control over your actual live stream, but you would take exactly the same credentials and put them into the same kind of prerequisite of RTMP streaming as opposed to platform streaming. And that'll give you the option to go live there from that third-party tool. And there are other ones out there as well. There's a whole raft of them now compared to what they used to be. And that's because I definitely do still think there is a lot of leverage and a lot of mileage left in live streaming. Cheers, Dan. And smack your can of Coke on the...
It was because I compressed it and then it popped out when I put it down.
Oh, is that what it was? I thought you just hit the boom arm on your mic. So, yeah, hopefully that's given people enough of an idea. If you've got any further questions, as we always say, please feel free to pop them into the comments box, and we'll have a look and potentially do a future show on them. Any further thoughts, Dan, or any additional questions that have kind of sprung to mind for you?
How do you stream via RTMP on Facebook?
You watch this live stream back, and all will be revealed.
No, I don't have any more questions. It's going to be interesting to see what changes come about with the API change, and especially if people do move to different platforms. I mean, as you say, Facebook has that massive ease of access, and whether people just go in and use Facebook's native social media scheduler, which it does have for pages. I'm not sure if it has it for groups, though. I assume they'll probably bring something out like that, probably. It would make sense. I mean, the purpose of groups for businesses is so wide. I mean, people are posting in daily and, multiple times a day, and people aren't going to go in and sit and type a post in and click post and manage it all day. People were using these external tools to do that. So there must be an end goal from Facebook on this to do something around those lines. And it'll be interesting to see where that goes. And, live streaming in Facebook groups is great because you go into that closed community. It's very different to live streaming on a page, which is what we do, and live streaming publicly, which is what we do on this show. And you can interact a lot more. People might interact more because they want that close-knit community type thing rather than a broad, viewership. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, definitely. And it's one to keep an eye on and probably revisit this in a couple of months when the changes have come in and have a chat about that again and answer a few questions on that. But it'll be interesting to see what happens over the coming months with that.
Yeah, a lot of people I know have paid community groups, and ultimately they use Facebook groups as their kind of preferred platform of choice.